Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on Tuesday morning. Hope everyone had just the right amount of fun last night and is ready for day two. So I'm really excited to have our panel here today to talk about something that I think, a couple years ago, I'm not necessarily sure was in the boardroom on a regular basis, but it definitely is now. And talking about supply chain and what that means to medtech manufacturers, and of course patients, making sure we can meet supply. So my name is Seth Goldenberg. I lead Veeva's medtech business, supporting the industry and bringing products to market. Joined today with a great panel. I'll keep introductions brief because they don't really need them. But from ResMed, Mick Farrell, CEO. Thank you for joining. Also from Flex is Jennifer Samperini. She's the CTO for healthcare. They're a product development and contract manufacturing firm. So thank you for joining. And then Tom Pollan from BD, CEO from BD. So thank you all, and welcome to our session today. So to kick things off, obviously disruptions to supply chain have been top of mind, right? Again, I think supply chain is also in the nightly news. It's probably in the everyday person's lexicon at this point. But of course, making sure you have the right supply chain for your products and have that resilience, starts much earlier than that. So I'll kick things off, by asking Jennifer from the product development side, when's the right time to start thinking about your supply chain?
Love this question. So certainly early stage risk identification is an important component. For example, with Flex, we have a joint risk management tool that is actually able to identify material and supply chain risks even at the earliest stages of product development. And this tool draws insights from thousands of different suppliers, billions of dollars of supply chain spend, and over 20,000 different products in order to help us better anticipate challenges, to make informed decisions around materials and components, and to make recommendations in ways to improve resiliency across the entire product portfolio and lifeline. So in addition to using these advanced analytical tools and infusing the principles of design for manufacturing and design for supply chain into early product development, Flex is also thinking about de-risking potential supply chain disruptions using a decentralized ecosystem approach and local for local sourcing. And all of these elements, including using a multi-sourcing approach, allow us to be well prepared for any sort of not only supplier disruption, but for disruptions to entire regions.
Great, thank you. No, that's really good. So, clearly thinking early from the design stage, right? How you're going to, ensure that it's resilient, throughout, is great advice. And then, Tom, maybe over to you for the next part. Thinking about, that supply chain and how to really, bring your suppliers in, early. What kind of business criticality are you looking at this, from your lens?
So much like Flex, we very strongly feel like if you're going to be excellent in this, you have to build it into your process and your systems. And so I'd say as we think about it, probably 4 different elements we think about across both new product development and current products. So one is it's built into your processes and systems, right? It's built into our board processes, our risk management process, and how we think about supplier management. It's built into our infrastructure. We use similar systems. We partnered with MIT on a new platform that they've rolled out where it lets us look at N-level suppliers, right? So suppliers of suppliers of suppliers. And we have stories where we'll call a supplier and we say, we think one of your subcomponents suppliers in Korea just had a fire. And so can you check on that? And they say, we have no idea what you're talking about. They'll call us back 2 days later and say, hey, thank you for that. There was a fire there, and we're working on to make sure that you have no interruption of supply. So systems and processes is important. As we think about current products, we have a annual system where we review, both our medical affairs team goes through and says what are the most important products that we make for patients, and that priority list then gets matrixed with what products generate the most significant financials for BD. So we look at financial and patient together, both very high priority. And we will then very purposely, even if something could be a small revenue for us, but it's very important for patient care, we then systematically apply tens of millions of dollars a year to validate secondary suppliers to prevent interruption. We've been doing that for decades. And so as we look at it, we review that list with our board at least twice a year. and we integrate it into our monthly operating reviews and our key driver goals that we put out, that we, again, integrate into our management system. So when COVID hit, that became extremely important, that work that we had been doing over time. I remember when we first started that, there was, for example, a supplier we found that we spent $60,000 with, but that $60,000 lubricant was used on $2 billion worth of needles and syringes, which were probably about 20 billion needles, which would have a tremendous impact. And I think all we spent was $60,000. So we weren't a very relevant purchaser with that supplier. We since have many suppliers that have been validated there, but that process drives that, right? New product development within our GPDS process, we have a system that, again, we don't let R&D leaders or folks working on a project just kind of randomly choose a supplier. It's really important. Again, we want scaled suppliers that we have relevance with that care. Even if we buy $10,000 from them, the more that we have relevance with them, the more that we're going to continue to make sure that we get preference. And the last thing I'll say is it's a team sport, right? It's R&D, it's supply chain, it's our public policy team, it's working with external groups like regulators. If you really want to be good at supply chain resilience, it's a team sport. There's no one function that's in charge of this. So.
That's great. Thank you. And then, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you're looking at this from a global perspective, right? Obviously, we want to be as local as possible, but we live in a global world. So how are you preparing for that?
Yeah, so look, we sell in 140 countries and we source from more than that in terms of our parts and pieces. And, as CEO for 43 quarters now of a public company, I spent my first 8 years really focused on the customers, governments, interactions, investors. And, my graduate thesis at MIT was on supply chain resilience, make-buy decisions, Monte Carlo simulations for hyaluronic acid for Genzyme. And that was the last time I had cared about supply chain, really. I mean, I knew we had a great supply chain system in our company, and I had someone who was the head of GSA, and they would take me to what I called a sales meeting, where all the suppliers would come together in Singapore, one of our hubs, or in Sydney, Australia. And I would sit there on stage and shake hands and give prizes to people that I paid money to for product. And this is pre-COVID. And I said to the GSA team, I said, why am I doing this? Why am I giving prizes to these suppliers who I pay money for? And they said, it's a team sport, not just within your company, but intra-company. And I was pretty skeptical, but it was a nice party, and it's as good as a sales force, and we have those relationships. When COVID hit, when we saw the whole world shut down, and we were literally leasing 777s that were on the runway in Singapore from Air Ethiopia or Air Canada to get our ventilators from Singapore to New York in the peak of that crisis, was like laser focus on the upstream part of our business. And the science, the use of AI. I didn't realize one of our first applications of generative AI and AI systems, ML systems, was in our supply chain. So when I realized the science and capabilities of our team, and then invested more in things that I probably hadn't allocated capital and time to, we now get to the levels of sophistication, and you both know and gave all the technical sides of it. But from my perspective, it's now something that's top of mind in the boardroom, top of mind in resiliency, top of mind for actually existence of the company through that crisis. And now we're on the other side of it. That whole world of just-in-time, Six Sigma black belts, and everything's down to the minimum low cost. There was one part for one piece of one ventilator from India that stopped us getting more ventilators to the world. One little O-ring from one little plant, and we were doing everything we could to get it out of there. The idea now is absolutely on the geopolitical side, on the, who would think there's a land war in Europe for the first time in 70 years, right? So things can happen. There could be an air and water war in Asia. We've got to think about capabilities and resiliency in supply the same way we think about the complexity of getting to customers of our markets and taking care of patients and changing lives.
No, that's great. And maybe let's unpack the globalization, the advocacy part a little bit more, because obviously when COVID happened, everything shut down. China was shutting down plants, India was shutting down plants. Unless it was business critical, things weren't opened, right? So maybe talk a little bit about what the team sport component, potentially reaching out beyond even with the R&D teams, and what levers did you have to pull to ensure that that supply chain, that O-ring, which might feel like no big deal to the Indian government, but you needed to be successful to keep that up and running?
Well, I mean, I can talk about the firefighting that happened before we had the changes, and then a little bit maybe about the solutions that we're looking at. I mean, the firefighting for that was, we were renting 777s. We were using Advamed, using the advocacy that we'd invested in here, right? Have a friend before you need one, through a US commerce to a head of Ministry of Health in India or China, and then working our way down to say this part and piece is necessary. I'd never had friendships that I knew. The ministers of health suddenly loved me. I'd been to visit them and had shaken their hands, and suddenly I was their best friend. And I mean, I'll be open on this. This isn't live streamed, but I don't really care if this is quoted. Minister of Health of Australia, my home country, called up and said, look, we need this many ventilators. And we said, look, we've done an epidemiology model of the whole world, of the flow of COVID-19, and this is how many ventilators 20 million people in Asia Pacific need. And they said, well, we think we need this, it's slightly more. And we said, well, no. And they said, well, you manufacture here, we could close it down. And I said, yes, we come from 250 countries. If you do that, then the whole system breaks down. And they didn't. They absolutely understood. I had a US Army general call me on my home phone number at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. You know, I'm an Orthodox Catholic. I don't work on Sundays. But I get this call, and it's like, hi, this is General blah, 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 blah. This is, how many ventilators can you give me? I'm like, well, I just out of REM sleep. From memory, on the spreadsheet, it's 2,550 ventilators we're going to allocate to HHS, to FEMA. And he said, well, we had 2,650. And I said, well, you can't, and this is to a US Army general, you can't get more than, and he said, all right, I thought I'd try. What price? And then I was like, well, the price, I think the list price to the VA is this. And he said, good, you're not going to go higher? Some others are going higher. I'm like, I'm not going to go higher. That's the price. It was a really interesting thing, but it can happen like that. And so the team sport is being ready for that. That's the firefighting, right? Go and get a plane in Singapore or fight in India, or respond appropriately to a US Army general or a Minister of Health of Germany or Australia. The hard part now is designing a system that's resilient enough that we have 3 opportunities for that O-ring. So that if I can't get the Minister of Health in India, I've got the Minister of Health in Taiwan or the Minister of Health in Ukraine or wherever. And try to choose places that are more stable, that have resilience to that. The whole world can't be stable on semiconductors because 80% come from one island, but many other parts of your supply chain can be, and it doesn't take till 2030 to get that resilience. So we're sort of working through on the multivariate systems, the 5 levels of suppliers, to find out where we can get resiliency, where we have risk, and what that looks like.
Great, that's great anecdotes as well. Appreciate you sharing. So, Jennifer, maybe I'll pivot to you when thinking about this from that, design perspective, making sure you can support that political environment, multiple sources, but also making sure you can meet the high quality that is required for healthcare today. Maybe you can just poke about from the product development R&D side.
Absolutely. So, like everyone on the stage, it starts with an absolute relentless commitment to quality standards. And within our organization, what really drives it is our culture of continuous improvement that pervades everything from design all the way through manufacturing and supply chain. So that culture of continuous improvement and Lean Six Sigma, combined with our advanced analytical tools, allow us to be able to really gather those insights around quality and ensure that we're getting proactive around it. Previously, I mentioned our joint risk management tool and how that can be used to proactively identify risks early in the design cycle. Well, it can actually also be used in real time so that we can allow our employees to make informed choices around quality based on the risks that we're learning from these aggregated systems, as well as the culture of continuous improvement that we're baking into our organization.
Great, thank you. And then, Tom, I think, moving to you just a little bit about, your perspective, and also you had to deal with all the, obviously, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure syringes are an important part of delivering COVID vaccine. So maybe talk a little bit about what you were facing during this time and the advocacy that you had to do for your organization.
So certainly not only syringes, so we actually made an extra 2 billion syringes just to deliver COVID vaccine. So we helped 1 billion people receive COVID doses. But we also were one of the first 2 companies on the planet to develop a rapid COVID test. Of course, most everyone going into a hospital needed suddenly infusions, et cetera, which we dramatically scaled up. They needed blood collection, all of that. And so, much like you described, we had our public policy team working with State Department and embassies around the world to keep our suppliers open. They were told to shut your business down if you're in an endemic area. And many times they may be making car parts and other components, but also molding something for us. And so they were told to shut down. We were able to get exceptions for 100% of those cases to keep all of our suppliers open and going. We work very closely with government agencies, the White House, the FDA, and others. I think, talk about a team sport, I often say, crisis doesn't build character, it reveals character. And I think what we saw is really just best-in-class partnerships across private industry and governments, because there was a clear purpose, right? We needed to help patients. We needed to help the world. And so, we had the White House, for example. We had Vacutainer components on a ship sitting in line in L.A. They called, and that boat went right to the front of the line. That's not something that normally you can make a phone call to do. But that's the power of when you're partnering together, and that helped prevent shortages during an important period of time. And the FDA was deeply involved, and we really kept supply chain going at a critical time in the country's history. I think as we go forward, there's a lot of lessons to learn through that, and I think the continued collaboration between private and public organizations to make sure that we keep resiliency built, both from a domestic perspective of manufacturing, but also create awareness, right? What are those products? Let's make really clear what are the products that are most important to run healthcare, and let's really dig deep and make sure that there's resilient supply chains. And government working on that with private industry is really the only way that that's going to happen. I think that's kind of a few comments on that.
I want to pile on to that public-private partnership part because, apart from the ministers of health reaching out, it was the FDA actually reaching out and saying, here's a pathway to not only keeping plants open and fighting for that, but emergency use authorizations, those EUAs for us to bring product to market faster. And if we had to, re-engineer and redesign, which we had to when the semiconductors just weren't available, we actually went completely off strategy. ResMed has 100% connectivity into every single CPAP, APAP, bi-level ventilator we make, right? We liberate the data to the cloud and give it to the patients for free and appropriately value that for physicians and providers. But for 9 months, we had to re-engineer and redesign a card to cloud like SneakerNet, like think mid-2000s data to cloud. But we did that. It was against strategy, but it was the right thing to do. But then the FDA had to give us the ability to validate, verify, and re-qualify a whole product line with a different component in it. And they partnered with us on that, as did many other agencies. The Department of Commerce. We had Gina Raimondo. She was the governor of
Rhode Island.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I like the executive people who then end up in the White House because she knew how to run a state. So then she knew how to talk to the CEO of Intel, the CEO of Texas Instruments, the CEO of these large semiconductor companies to say, listen, medtech's only 1% of your revenue model. Apple's much bigger. Like the Tesla, there's like 1,000 semiconductors in a Tesla. There's 2 in my ventilator. But mine can save a life. The other can get you from A to B really quickly. What do you need to do? But me saying that, it's very biased. Even as an AvaMed group saying that of CEOs. But I remember being on a Zoom call with you. I think I was in Europe. You're in Timbuktu somewhere as well. And we're on that screen, and Jean was there listening. And then she went the next day on CNBC, Fox Business, CNN, and said, listen, lives matter, semiconductors for that. And I was like, wow, what a microphone. So that public-private partnership was a big part of us getting through this.
Oh, that's great. So maybe let's pivot and talk about lessons learned right from this, being ready for the future. So, so Tom, we'll start with you on this one. As you're looking forward and you're growing your business, right? MedTech a lot during M&A. When you're bringing in new organizations, what do you look at from a supply chain perspective to ensure that one, you're efficient, but also getting ready for potentially what's in the future?
That's an extremely important point. So we've been very acquisitive. We've done 19 acquisitions over the last 3 years, and that was, of course, after 2 large transformational acquisitions that the company had done. But that is probably one of the highest level focuses for us in diligence, because it's very common. What we find is small companies will go to just whoever's local or whoever someone knows and start buying components. And that doesn't mean that they can scale. It doesn't mean that those suppliers have the systems and processes in place to be resilient at the level that we expect, right? Our bar for resilience when we scale to hundreds of millions or billions, we make more medical devices than Lego does pieces, right? When we talk scale, we mean scale, right? And so we are very systematic in our suppliers, not just on their systems, but the way that they operate, how they treat their people, right? Making sure that they're abiding by all rules. Of course, we also think about sustainability in that process more so than ever today. And so that's a key part. I've seen deals where we've actually walked away from the deal because they had a core fundamental supplier that just wasn't going to, we thought was going to be a problem long term. I've seen that in the interventional space. And that's the first area as we think about integration is going in, and it's very often we start validating secondary suppliers because a lot of the companies that we're buying that are small, they don't have the time or effort, and they shouldn't be necessarily at that phase validating secondary suppliers. That's one of the first things we do after acquisition is start making sure that we have a resilient supply chain, because if you're trying to drive growth and you hit a quality issue or a supply issue, that's the biggest way to blow up the money that you just spent and what you're trying to deliver for patients.
That's good. Maybe before we go on, unpack one thing that you said was interesting, because I think a lot of the folks out here might be looking at a potential acquisition, right? Maybe just talk a little bit more about that red flag and what you see. So for folks that might be smaller and they're developing their supply chain today, what would you be looking at during that process?
Is there anything proprietary that they have that is someone else's proprietary that you're going to rely on? What type of supplier is that? How resilient is their manufacturing processes? How relevant are you to that supplier? If you have something that's proprietary that you can't access from anyone else and you're a very small player in that, we'll have discussions with suppliers under CDA at times as part of our diligence process. And that sometimes can throw people in the loop, but we'll identify a hot spot that we say we actually need to go talk to your supplier before we'll acquire you, because it's that important in our diligence process. So we include our procurement department, and our integrated supply chain is deeply involved in all of our diligence efforts. They're part of our playbook with very specific questions that we get into. Looking at supplier resilience, quality of suppliers is all an important part of that playbook, right? You don't do it randomly. You have to have a systematic approach that you do every time. It can't just be Jane does it this way, Joe does it this way. We focus on, we know how to do it right. We've taken learnings from the 19 we've done in the last 3 years and the many more before that, and we feel really good about our processes. They work, and I'd say in the last certainly the last 10 years, we've had a much higher focus on the supplier side than we did before, for all the reasons that we're talking about here today.
No, that's great. Thanks for letting me go off script a little bit there. I think that's good for all of us to hear. And maybe let's talk a little bit about, what have you learned, that continuous improvement mindset, right? What are you taking from everything that you went through, especially in the ventilator space, and leading forward as you're continuing to grow?
Well, first, I didn't know there was a script, so I've been off script the whole time, so good to know.
We'd expect nothing less from you.
Next time I'll read the script.
It's okay. I'm not sure if it would have mattered.
Yeah. No, I think I did read your thoughts. Continuous improvement and resiliency. I think that's always been part of medtech. We've always had that. We've always had design for quality. If you don't design quality into your systems, you're going to have a very bad legacy from that. You don't do design for patient care. You don't do design for us now in digital and cybersecurity. You don't do design for privacy. You don't do design for the long-term sustainability of your products, whether it's getting materials that are lower cost, lower materials. And it's not difficult. ESG, for actually us in this room, should be SGE. It should be social first, because we change lives every day with our products. They save lives, our products. It should be then G, which is the governance, the privacy, the cybersecurity, the quality, and taking care of things and doing the right thing. As C.S. Lewis said, integrity is doing the right thing when nobody is watching. That's the governance part. And then E, environment. Look, overlapping altruism with the profit motive is actually quite easy. Every time we have less energy used in our plant, we save money for our shareholders, and it's good for the world. One of our troubles, I think, in our industry is we never counted it. We didn't look at it. And taking a little bit of credit in our sustainability reports, well, here's the CO2 reduction. It's good for the world. And actually, here's what we save for our shareholders in energy reduction. So it's actually not that difficult to do it. But that continuous improvement process now goes all the way from quality to regulatory to design to now include supply chain and how you think of that. I'm responsible under many laws for my supplier's use of resources, my supplier's use of resources, and so on. So yeah, when you look at M&A or you look at design of a product in-house or a new venture-thon idea, we have a little Shark Tank internally that's going to start up, you better show how you're doing everything from design and sourcing all those materials to go through. So continuous improvement's always been there in our operations team, but it's now in our design teams, our M&A teams, and beyond. And so it's not difficult. We've got the playbooks, but it's just applying it across different functions and trying to get rid of those silos that can form between different functions.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. So, maybe last question for our last few minutes that we have is, let's talk about digitization, digital tools. Obviously Viva, we support over 1,100 life science companies, right? So during COVID, we innovated and released things to do remote auditing, right? To keep that supply chain going, bring on new suppliers and still be compliant. And maybe Jennifer, let's start with you about, when you're thinking about bringing products to market quickly, ensuring patient safety, what digital tools are you using through that process, from design, in through supplier quality in that supply chain?
Absolutely. From the design side, we're actually using advanced simulation tools, digital twins to allow us to de-risk faster, to bring in some early insights before even reducing those concepts into a physical prototype. So those same digital tools we can also apply to the manufacturing line. So we can identify potential bottlenecks and improve the flow through improved efficiencies. And then in addition to that, we can use the technology such as, I think Tom, you mentioned so much of this. For us, it's called Pulse. And we bring together insights from thousands of supply chains. I think we have 16,000 different suppliers that we pull into this. We have their portals, we have logistics, we have transportation and manufacturing. All of that comes together into a single point of truth, which then allows us to garner, some really incredible insights and to be able to move faster and predictably.
That's great. Tom, maybe you can share a little bit about, you hinted on it a little bit, but maybe dig a little bit more about what tools you're looking at to have that 360 view about your supply chain while ensuring quality.
First off, we use some of your tools at Viva, as you know, and we've been expanding the use of those as free advertisement. We have a control room, so we actually can go in and I can see where any ship with BD product on it, literally a map of the world, and click and see exactly where it is and when it's going to arrive at its destination, so we can track every single one of the movements of our materials and products around the world. That's capabilities we've invested in. You talked about capabilities we've invested in to look deeper at suppliers is part of our systems. And then we are using AI as we think about optimizing inventory levels, right? There's always that delicate balance of making sure that we're freeing up cash flow to invest in other areas while making sure that we have the material in the right locations to support our customers, and we're using AI now in that process, both from a forecasting but also demand fulfillment in the regions where we're keeping materials in regional warehouses, and how we optimize the levels of that to be able to optimize cash flow and keep as minimal inventory levels as possible with optimal service levels to customers. And AI is really much better than people at doing that analysis, right? People tend to have much more than is needed, and we've been able to see actually our ability to raise service levels significantly while freeing up cash to be able to reinvest in other areas, right? To continue to invest back in more resiliency, to invest back in more innovations, acquisitions, et cetera. And so I think there's, AI is going to have a tremendous positive impact in this area in particular, right? Around production planning, around supplier risk mitigation. We're just getting started in that area. Lots of opportunities ahead. You certainly know that better than anyone. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then maybe some closing thoughts on what you're using from a digital perspective to stay agile, avoid downtime, right, and make sure you're growing business.
And I'll do this in 39 seconds. That's what we have left. No, I'll go back to where I started, that I think one of the challenges is actually making sure we have excellent data in our systems, because the generative AI, the AI ML tools are out there. Supply chain is ripe for it, much better than humans, looking at so much data over so many inputs. But getting the good data, turning it to accurate information at the right time in the right place has been a big work for us these last 5 years. And I think we're finally at a point where you can let the algorithms run and you're going to get good information out, and much better than our systems before. The last 3 years, the big dips and turns of COVID were huge perturbations that tested those models to an extreme. we had built a resiliency for 2030 strategy, and we pivoted all the way to that with a supply chain crisis, a competitor recall in 2021. Now we're looking at 2040, 2050. I hope there's not a big perturbation, and that's just good planning for the long term. And that's all I got, Seth.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panel for the discussion today.